Buongiorno, benvenuti.
Good morning to all of you and welcome to today's meeting called Reason and Freedom, the Creation of an Individual. I was talking with a journalist who was asking me about the meeting. He was asking me what topics will be addressed at the meeting, and I was telling him that today's topic is the most important topic of the meeting. We are addressing the idea of a lack in the heart of people, which, unless we address it, will leave behind a void which will be the cause of all evils. Facing this lack means being able to experience it. And so the idea of Abraham, of the birth of God, the exhibitions by Weiler and the meeting with Caron are experiences of people who are able to face this lack. However, the topic of education is also very important. Today we're talking about the generation of an individual, and I believe this is a very important topic. And I'm not surprised that so many people are here today, because we're not talking about politics or social issues, which are of course very important, as well as ethical issues. Education has a very important consequence for all of us. Today we're talking about self-awareness of a person. The idea that we are aware of ourselves. The idea that everything is way too big for us. Charlie Brown and Mafalda discussed this in a comic strip. Mafalda says, everything is too small for me. I'm claustrophobic. We have to be ready to open ourselves to the world. And to do this, we need reason to face reality. Reason is fundamental to understand reality, and education has a lot to do with reason. So talking about education, equal opportunities, independence, has to do with reason which must be open to reality. The meeting has a lot of examples of education, for example, the exhibition about the 30 years of the Sacred Heart Institute. At the heart of school and of teaching is reason. Reason which allows us to look at the world around us and learn something from it. Today's guests will tell us what it means for our reason to be open, what it means to be able to reason. If we're not capable of reasoning, we are not open to reality. We are not ready to face this lack. We are not able to understand what is happening around us. And so you will understand how important today's topic is, because it will teach us to understand the very topic we're addressing at the meeting. There are two very important guests today, Mr. Eddo Rigotti, professor at the IALS, the Institute of Linguistics and Semiotics at the Italian Switzerland University. And Mr. Carlo Wolfsgruber, who's also the director of the Grossman Foundation in Milan. So I now give the floor to Mr. Wolfsgruber. Our goal today, my goal and Professor Rigotti's goal, is that of sharing our experience with all of you. Thanks for being here today. I would like to welcome each and every one of you. Unfortunately, I can't, but thanks for being here. Our goal today is that of sharing the experience of a group of people who have been working to a project we have entitled Academy. What has this project to do with today's title? The focus of our project has to do with the words of today's title, that is Reason and Freedom. Reason and freedom are two fundamental elements for the self-fulfillment of an individual. And this is the topic of today's event. The individual is the most important thing for us. It is the goal of our project. And the individual is a person who is able of judging, of reasoning. So education is a very important aspect for every society. And we believe education is fundamental for every society which, despite every intention, risks remaining insignificant. If a society does not want to be insignificant, education is fundamental. So the first part of my speech is entitled Defending Reason and Therefore Freedom. In order to understand why we created the project Academia, I would like to tell you something about my personal experience. I grew up as a kid in the 50s in a middle-class cultural context. That context was characterized by rationalism, which was sure that it could solve everyday problems, but it was subject to a higher power in terms of the most important issues for society. And for me, it was very surprising and fascinating to hear the words of Don Giussani when I attended high school, when he described reason in a very different way, awareness of reality, taking into consideration all its factors. And so reason, in that way, can remain open to reality itself only if we constantly take into consideration possibility. So until we are aware, like Hamlet was, that there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. This is not the right place to go into detail about why this new definition is important. However, 60 years after I listened to this new definition for the very first time, and by looking back at everything I experienced in my life, I have to say that reason, seen this way, is so true that it can never be obvious. However, it can never fully be understood, although quite often we use it as a slogan. And so this is why we reject what I would define as intuitionism, which talks about being surprised as a non-rational or sentimental experience, and so something which has nothing to do with true experience. The reason, as Don Giussani used to say, has to do with the experience of being surprised, of wondering in front of what amazes us. And so, in this way, reason can involve the whole of a person. Many times I've been told, "You're right, I understand, but my heart is in another place," so to speak. And so, the heart, instead of being a way to connecting the total of the being and the totality of a rational subject, becomes only the place where sentimental variability is present. And the result is that the person is divided within itself. And we can see this in today's human relationships in society, which are precarious. And so if we want to defend reason, we also have to defend freedom. Because, as Father Giussani used to say, freedom is a place where the value of reason becomes real. It is felt and it is experienced. Freedom can always say no, even to the most obvious of reasons. However, every time it does, it commits self-violence. Even in this case, freedom must always be defended, because without freedom, there wouldn't be humanity. And so defending reason and freedom today, our own freedom and the freedom of others, is for us the most important value in education.
Secondo punto.
The second part of my speech is entitled Defending Education. The first experience as a teacher I had dates back to the 1960s, 1968, where I taught at an evening school at a very famous technical institute in Milan, where there were the first school movements. During the day, I was a researcher at the National Research Center at the Polytechnic University. And in the evening, I taught evening courses. I'm still a teacher. I am now responsible for a group of schools. There are kindergartens, but also high schools in Milan. So during these years, I have seen a series of events which have confirmed how important education is. What is at stake in school is not a change in models which then appear as a way of bringing back to life corpses. Because school cannot only be the place where knowledge is passed on to a generation which is less and less interested in life. I found a quote by Peggy, which I really liked, and so I would like to read it out for you. I would like for all of you to know it as well. In 1904, Peggy wrote, "Crises in teaching are not crises of teaching. They reveal a crisis of life, and they are crises of life themselves." The rest of a society can pass under disguise. Teaching does not pass. When a society cannot teach, this does not mean that it doesn't have the necessary tools or arts. So we just have to buy iPads or add another certificate of English. When a society is not able to teach, it means that this society is not able to teach to itself. It means this society is ashamed. It means this society is afraid of teaching to itself. For every society, teaching means learning. A society which does not teach is a society which does not love itself, which doesn't respect itself. And this is exactly the case of modern society. End of quote. What Peggy said about teaching can no doubt be applied as well to educating and education. And so the love for life and the desire to convey this love for life was at the basis of our efforts for better education. I'm not talking about love for the life of others, as if teachers were those who thought they could suggest solutions because they had found a solution to the problem. A teacher is not someone who believes they can just give advice. A true teacher is someone who's interested in his own life. And so he's not afraid of finding a vulnerability which enables them to understand more about everything that is around him. One day I asked Father Giorgio Pontigia why every morning he waited for his students in front of the school and why he said hi to each and every one of them. He answered, "I do this because they show me every day why I am doing this. I use the word life not generically. Life is a mix of relationship which has to do with the totality of existence and at the same time the diversity which every person brings with them. So accepting and protecting this diversity as a resource is not obvious. I have talked many times with parents who tried to defend their children and saw in school the reason why their children had problems at school. When I was asking a mother to explain what she meant, she said, "Do you think I like my daughter? If I can stand her, why shouldn't you be able to stand her as well?" That mother believed she was actually defending her daughter, but actually she wasn't defending her daughter at all. For her, her daughter was an unbearable diversity. And so if a mother cannot communicate anything to her daughter, then school cannot do what the family is not able to do. The third part of my speech is entitled An Ironic Effort. I became the director of the Foundation Grossman 10 years ago, and I started to realize that we are faced with a choice. Either we make the system which is already there better, either we improve it, or we try doing something new. And I believe the second choice was closer to the way I intended education. And I wanted to do this not because I am passionate about diversity, but because I believe that news can help us understand better reason, and it can help us regain our freedom. And I believe the new experience can have a positive impact on education. And so I looked for other people who could help me develop my idea. And this is how I met Professor Rigotti. And in him I found a person who was an expert. He was open and he had the desire to help me put my idea into practice. We soon became friends and we started working right away. And this is how academia was created in 2010. And I now give the floor to Professor Rigotti.
Thank you, Carlo. The project Academia comes from a strong interest and a strong commitment in education. This is what Carlo Wolfsgruber told us. What do we mean by education? By education, we mean the fulfillment of the individual. This is what the Latin expression cultus atque humanitans meant, namely culture or civilization as a cultivation of the human, growing our human nature that's inside of us. Educating means taking part in a culture, knowledge, knowing how to do things in order to be able to live in a community. Obviously, communities will extinct because they are made up of men that are not able to live in a human way. Culture and education are at the basis of every social reality, of every community, of every institution. The institution is an educational act itself. It becomes possible thanks to education. And this is also true for the Christian community. Divina institutione formati, as we say in Latin during the communion. And so, culture is and education are the fundamental asset of every institution. even economic and financial institution. It might seem banal to say it, but the crisis we're going through is a problem of culture, as Peggy said, of culture and then of education. We've said that educating means taking part in a culture. Knowing things and knowing how to do things helps us live amongst men. We've also said that educating is fulfilling our human nature and participating in a culture. As a matter of fact, man is prole inetta. It needs educating, feeding. Man needs to learn language with grammar books and semantics, but it also needs to learn how to walk, drink, play, eat, and sometimes even smiling and laughing. The characteristics of the human being, according to philosophy, anima razionale, we are not born with them, but we acquire them during our life. When talking about the fulfillment of our human nature, it is important to highlight that education is not a set of components, but it's about learning models. We misinterpret education as a way to convey information, competencies, skills, or values. Educating is a process in which all of these things are acquired by the student, accompanied by his teacher in the encounter with reality. Only if we're able to do so, we will be successful and not manipulated. Education must promote the encounter with the reality so that we can fulfill ourselves. Only if we open ourselves to the reality, we can do so only if we are able to help our self-awareness, and only in this way we can fulfill ourselves. Fulfillment does not mean adding something. It means becoming what we really are. And if we open to reality as a whole, looking for its meaning, the individual activates its reasoning, which is what makes him different. You were not made to live like unto brutes, but for pursuit of virtue and of knowledge. Educating means helping, promoting, not determining the openness to reality. We can fulfill ourselves if our reason is created and we can open ourselves through our heart because we're free. And through this fulfillment of reasoning, by answering our ultimate questions, and this is what we call faith, even in this, freedom is essential. We must not ignore that freedom is a fundamental aspect of every form of interreligious dialogue. What does it mean to accompany, to help? The idea of educating as conveying skills is an ongoing temptation in order to guarantee continuity of the powerful. Words like promoting, helping, as we said, indicate something which is at risk. Educating means risk. I cannot impose my own opinion, I can suggest it. And so the student finds that my proposal as a teacher coincides with his own expectation. And here we find the interest and then the deepest desire, la raison d'être of the student. Since reasoning means opening ourselves to reality, it is determined by the only principle of adhering to reality. This is the only way to follow. The proposal of obeying means being able to express our reasons, our opinions. A real education, educating to our human nature, it's also a critical education other than free education. The argumentum ex authoritatem for middle-aged people was infirmissimum, the weakest, while nowadays it's got a surprising prestige. It takes over adequate matters in many contexts, scientific, political, administrative, and the expert must provide judgments. And so we run a risk of making many mistakes because of this. In a free and critical education, we cannot ignore all this. I'd like to state that an actual lay school must take all of this into account in order to justify every action and provide reasoning. If there is no proposal, there is no education. The richer the hypothesis, because rich of argumentations, the more human and lay is education. However, in such a school, the authority of the teacher lies in his capacity of providing the reasons behind his proposal and using an argumentative and a reasonable rhetoric. And in order to do so, they must learn how to use the contents of what they learned or what they're teaching themselves. And so, by applying all this, applying our own reasoning, our students will learn how to do their own. This is the authenticity of a personal and interpersonal commitment of the teacher. So we must beware of some fake myth. A school with the idea of selectivity, where students often fail their exams, is not automatically a serious school, a good school, just like in a company who fires a lot of employees. What is important is not selectivity, but being up to the task of educating to life. The best student can always be an incapable student. We always live under the myth of competitiveness, but it's not always true that the winning person is the best person. And many real-life tasks, especially the most interesting, from family to the company to from political world to administration, They do not always require only competitiveness, but also interaction and cooperation. There is a fake objectivity aiming at respecting forms, because forms are always able to be controlled. Some teachers sometimes overdo when focusing on the morphosyntactical aspects and ignore the whole text and the content. And so tools are indispensable. But the real aim of these tools are more important than tools themselves. And so focusing on the instrumental aspects comes from the fear of not being up to our task, institutional tasks. There is often a dualist position which separates knowledge and values, namely knowledge and its own meaning for the individual. However, knowledge means the subject. Values depend on this implication. Knowing things has not only got to do with reality, but it also depends on the individual in front of their reality. Knowing means a self encountering reality, becoming familiar with the self and reality. Our ethics depends on our anthropology and ontology. Knowledge ignoring the individual is meaningless, and so it's not interesting. On the other hand, values, sometimes proclaimed without relation to reality, only have a sentimental justification. The relation between knowledge and its meaning for the individual guarantees the reasonableness of the judgment. We run in the risk of a fragmentation of knowledge. The individual, both students and teacher, run the risk of of getting out of sight the perspective of the unity of reasoning. In the academia project, we've tried to develop an interdisciplinary approach in order to compare the different subjects and overcoming the divide between knowledge and human sciences and exact sciences. It is worth highlighting the importance of the freedom of the teacher as well. However, we shall never forget that the teacher's freedom becomes possible only with coherence and reasonableness within what we do, what students do together with teachers. This is how students can really become whole individuals. And so, teachers together must promote the education of individuals that are able of judgment, capable of judgment. We can only talk about context within a dimension that we'd like to call self-awareness, community self-awareness of reasoning. School education implies not only one individual, but a community of teachers and their classroom and their class, their group of students. And the educational project must be interdisciplinary. These three elements were deeply taken into account, especially in the first period of the academia project. As for the use of the reasoning, we've analyzed it into detail in the second part of our project. I'd like to say that our interest for reasoning is not intended to hide the attempt to add other subjects to our curricula. As Aristotle used to say, it is a kind of research which is spread throughout every subject. It is common to every subject without ever being a separate subject. We do not learn separately, or we do not learn in a separate way. We are always placed in a context. And so it is important to apply this kind of approach. And it is very easy to apply. We should not be surprised by that, because it is easy to apply thanks to the ultimate unity of reasoning. But Carlo Wolfsgruber will share with you all of these thoughts in a much better way. Thank you.
Così io mi permetto di concludere.
I would like to tell you something about the story of academia to conclude. There were two steps in this project. The first moment in our project was an action research project. That is, we involved the students in doing research in the classroom, not only from a theoretical point of view, but through experience at school. So, the first moment was a project of action research, which became a higher education interdisciplinary education program for teachers of high schools. This project started in July 2011 with a 3-day course, which was entitled Knowledge and Self-Fulfillment, Interdisciplinary Education Program in Mathematics, Writing, History, and Dante. About 100 teachers, high school teachers, took part in this course. They formed 24 teams made up of 4 teachers each, which dealt with the 4 subjects which had been chosen. There were 2 moments in this course. The first was a moment where we all discussed the title and we explained how we reason in the different subjects. And the second moment was divided by subjects. And you can read the result of this course in a book of the Foundation for Subsidiarity in cooperation with Foundation Grossman. And so the work of teams continued in the following year through the creation of essays which start from a common subject and are then explored in more detail in each subject. They were called area topics. 15 teams have concluded their essays and they have been evaluated by expert committees. Some of them were published. And attention was particularly dedicated to practice, to practical experience, which was useful to identify the problems which emerge in the classroom. But also, it was useful to understand the results of that work. And so, the main question, which has to do with the first moment of academia, is: am I, as a teacher, able to challenge the students? Am I able not to disattend the expectations of students? In order to answer these questions, we have try to understand how reason is used in the 4 subjects through interdisciplinarity. So the common aspects which have to do with that common subject we discussed can be considered as an answer to that question. And I will mention some of the titles which sum up these answers. Question as the origin of the text, categories as questions to reality, reason in the relationship with the teacher, when ideas shine, heuristic moments in the process of knowledge, the value of dialogue for knowledge, inference, and the important aspects in disciplines. This volume, which has been published online on the website of Foundation for Subsidiarity, others will be available soon, has been produced by a team which has worked focusing on the encounter between the subject with the object, and on the moment in which the subject understands the object, the meaning of the object, and understands why the object is important for the individual. What we learned from this first moment of our project is that school is something that has to do with a community. So a school cannot only be created thanks to a group of teachers who decide to come together and to organize themselves to have a logo, for example. So what is necessary is that teachers share a common project, that they develop it together. It is important that they take responsibility and that they take charge. They decide to address a synthetic proposal. However, teachers have to appropriate that proposal. They have to make it theirs, and they have to be able to rediscuss it. Otherwise, they will not manage to put it into practice. Let's imagine a group of teachers discussing the programs, the school programs. Every teacher might mean that it is simply a way of discussing our opinions and then finding a compromise. However, each teacher represents a common view of school, of the goal of school, and of the methods to be used to achieve that goal. And so it is important that each teacher expresses their view of school clearly, because only in this way will the discussion have a tangible result. And this is possible only if teachers are able to suggest a proposal which have to do with ideas, not with opinions. And this is when things change, because in that moment, the meeting of teachers managed to actually plan to have a project and to take into consideration the ideas and experiences of everyone. And I believe this process is important not only in school, but also in other contexts. The second step, the second moment for academia and its perspectives. The second moment started last July with a new course, which lasted almost 3 days, which was called Argumentation for a Reasonable Relationship with Reality. More people than we expected took part in the course, more than 300 people, and about 70% of participants came from the world of school. Teachers, not only high school teachers, but also kindergarten teachers. There were directors, but there was also another 30% of people who came from various contexts, from university, from companies, from the economic world, from the financial world. And the goal was that of focusing on reason as the ultimate virtue. And we identified inference as the process through which reason dialogues with reality in different contexts to verify and expand knowledge. So it is what brings us from not knowing to knowing. The course was divided into two parts. The first part was theoretical, methodological, and the second one was dedicated to argumentation in different contexts. And very important things emerged, for example, reasoning in childhood, falsifications in history through false inference, which belong to the same reasoning. There is a way of manipulating by saying banal things. Another point was the interest for the object, not neutrality, is essential for good argumentation. Another point was the importance of argumentation in economic and financial contexts. And the last one was old topics and old problems which stop educators from doing their job. For example, false opposition between humanistic and scientific knowledge, between the reason of the mind and the reason of the heart, between reason experience, between philology and hermeneutics. I would like to conclude by telling all of you what we said to our participants. We created academia, but it is not a problem for us to continue our project, because academia is not just something which has to be completed. What we need is someone who wants to cooperate with us, to share our passion for reason, because we have discovered that if reason is used properly, then we can understand reality, understand what interests us better. So the project is already there, we just have to continue it. And by saying that there are people available to do this, I see that reason can actually be a tool for self-fulfillment. And I was surprised by this in my childhood, and I am surprised to seeing that what I had discovered during my childhood was actually true now that I'm older. Thank you.
Allora, siccome siamo...
Since we're talking about education, it is okay if we have some unplanned questions in order to see if our guests are prepared well enough. So I'd like to raise a question. Taking into account what you've said, since this is a moment when a lot of people are starting to enter the school or entering public school. So what do you think are the needs for a teacher or anyone who works in a public school or in a free school? So I think that it's always a shared problem, both for public and private school. Teachers must reacquire their own subjects and knowledge, and try to establish a dialogue with other teachers. Even if there is no context, no given context, in educational terms, reacquiring things, it's a need of every teacher, a must do. I have nothing to add, actually. I'd say that if we do not do this, we make a huge mistake by using excuses because we cannot carry out teaching and education on our own. And so we must reflect and think about what we are teaching, because I must believe in what I'm teaching myself. And so I have to be sure about what I teach, the contents and my knowledge. And this entails a huge critical commitment. And so comparing my own research field, but I must also be able to create a project in which school must be organized. And so we may have an interdisciplinary approach. Is this also true when the other people are ideologically different? But this is an opportunity that is given to us. Encountering other people, putting to the test their ideology, and so forcing themselves to face reality, to address their task, which is a shared task. Because the vocation of all teachers is helping their students to grow from a cultural point of view. It's just like journalists. We all have journalist friends, and sometimes we say bad things about them. But I've always met journalists who had the vocation of stating the reality, things as they were. It's their prerogative. And this is also true for teachers. I can talk to them and see how they are willing to help their students grow. Sometimes we might find ourselves in bad contexts when teachers are not at the service of their students. This is worth stating and claiming, but I don't think this is the case. And so, in order to create individuals, we always hide behind excuses. It is possible, but right now it is not possible because we don't have the adequate conditions. Or, as Rigotti just said, instead of starting from the anthropology, we start from the ethics. But as he said, the ethics depends on our anthropology. And so today we learned that in order to create individuals, we need to have the adequate method, and nothing can stop this method. Don Carron, president of the Fraternity of Communal Liberation, by quoting Don Giussani, said that the difficult task of creating an individual lies in the difficulty of having a method. And today we've learned what having a method means. A method that is based on anthropology, on people, on the experience of being man, defending reason and our freedom, defending education as bringing people to life. teachers waiting for the students to learn about life. And so, the idea is learning from each other, learning from the people we have in front of us instead of imposing our own opinion. Rigotti also said that crisis is a cultural problem. It's not an organizational problem or because of the economic crisis. It's not a problem of the context, but it's a cultural problem. And so, in the second part of his talk, we talk about an example. How a theoretical example can be put into practice. And so, using reason in order to learn from reality. What Rigotti said, in a free individual who does not impose but is persuading people. This is true for all of us. No matter which kind of school, I can do this wherever, public school, free school, private school. I can either do it or not. I can share a project and a proposal everywhere, even with different people. And as Rigotti used to say, if I do not do it, it's because I cannot do it. Over the past few years, we've kept saying that we invite people that are different from us to the meeting. And this is the most important thing. Developing this project anyhow, in good circumstances, people that are close to us in private school, but also in public schools and outside schools. Someone used to say, we cannot defend school. Yes, we can defend school because we must allow our students to be able to grow and express themselves in every way. And so, today's topic was a very important one because it gives us freedom of thought without hiding behind excuses, saying that other people are essential in order to make a change. We can learn from each other and creating a project together with other people. And so this perfectly fits this meeting where the people that accompany us in our journey can be people different from us, coming from other ideologies or religions. As we heard this morning in the meeting about Don Giussani, whoever can be walking with us in this journey. People that are different from us, if we want to be up to the lack that we feel in our heart. Thank you.
Avviso.
Important announcement. Since it is important to support the meeting, in order for the meeting to be able to continue over the following years, other than sponsors and what you spend here, fundraising is very important in order to freely contribute in order to support the meeting. With your own donation. So we started last year with this fundraising. You can donate in Hall South, Pavilion C1, A1, A3, C5, or on the webpage of the meeting, www.meetingrimini.org. You will receive the community meeting card, which will provide you some benefits for the exhibitions, but most of all the benefit of knowing that you have made good use of your reason. Thank you.